Listen to the radio. Harry and Edna's want to show you heard it from the Three Bells.
What-o, Harry?
And what-o, Edna, and welcome. It's Harry and Edna on the wireless, where we take a little sneaky peek at the British vintage scene. And today is a first.
Yes.
It is we are
Go on, get those words out.
I'm struggling.
You're trying to paint the scene.
I'm thinking we are like creating a vapour trail over the blue sky of big band.
We are, because we've got Britain's only professional female big band leader, Debbie Curtis. Welcome to the show, Debbie.
Thank you very much, Edna and Harry, and hi, your listeners.
So, what we're going to... Well, you were actually just listening to Debbie, weren't we, singing Jericho?
Yes.
Singing live. We had all the applause. Yay! There's a lot of people in the studio.
It's like Waldorf Slater, isn't it, out the Muppets?
What-ho?
And I'm terrified to say this, because while we're off air, Debbie was saying she'll come over and say, Stop! You're presenting the show wrong and we have to start again.
But we'll save that story for later.
Oh, I'm not allowed to say it?
No.
I heard that Miff Mole used to shoot holes in people's trombones if they didn't play right. He didn't wasn't so keen on trombonists.
Oh, so they literally got shot at if they weren't playing the trombones correctly?
Yeah, he used to shoot holes in trombones. He was a bit of a gangster. Well, he was a gangster, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, I'm rather scared now because the third track we always play is a V-disc, and I did have to admit it's not one of the greatest V-discs we have in our collection. V-discs were known as victory discs, and they were recorded by the American stars of the day and sent out to troops during World War II to sort of raise morale. And our friend Jeff in Charleston, What-o Jeff, sent us a whole batch of them, and some of them absolute corkers, and some of them...
Less so. To put it diplomatically.
I'm going to get a load of hate mail now on the old Twitter Telegraph, probably.
But give us
and if you're not sure, it's at Harry and Edna.
What-ho?
Short but sweet. But it's great to welcome to the show Britain's only professional female big band leader, Debbie Curtis. Welcome to the show.
Well, hello there, Edna.
Debbie, for those listeners who aren't quite sure what the big thing is about being the only female big band leader, do you want to just describe to us why that is so unique?
I think nowadays there are other female sort of band leaders, but not necessarily professional, so I do it as a full-time job, hence I'm broke most of the time.
Because running a big band is no easy task, I'm assuming.
No. The band itself is all about tempos, so that nowadays especially you can dance to. If you count in something too fast, a march becomes a gallop, and a foxtrot becomes a cha-cha, so you need to know your tempos and stuff. And yeah, it's... nowadays, 17 people is a big band, this absolutely. Day and age.
So really this wasn't something that you've just wandered into, is it? It's been in your blood,
yes,
so to speak.
Yes, sadly.
Do you want to tell our listeners sort of what the background to it was? Because it was really from your father, right?
My dad was a big band leader and my mum was an opera singer. My dad started out the Eddie Curtis Radio Orchestra, Eddie Curtis Radio Big Band in 1972. And he worked with various people, including sort of Lionel Hampton, Teddy Foster, Ted Heath, a lot of the, obviously British big bands, and then went on to start his own big band and had various people like John Miller's dad, Herb, in the trumpet section, and he'd have Tommy Whittle in the sax section, and various, again, well-known people, and he used to back people like sort of Tommy Cooper on live shows. And I think I was just brainwashed with it. Now it's all, so I've ended up with a complete obsession, really, with big bands and the history of big bands, obviously, which is what I sort of specialise in, and what I love is bringing that music to the current day in good quality without sort of changing the arrangements, but hopefully now with using technology these days, which you can, the good side of it is you can get very clean, clear recording. In fact, actually, you often put scratches back on it nowadays,
really?
Which defeats the object, really. But,
yeah.
Hopefully to be able to take that music another stage further to new audiences whilst keeping the original audience.
And is sort of the world of big bands changed enormously since your father's day?
There's not as many gigs because you've got karaoke out there now, and it's an expensive setup to put out a fully pro big band. But there's been a bit more in the last sort of 5 years. You've got more people coming into it, like Robbie Williams and things, who are actually bringing it to new ears. And I think he does a very good job, although I know he's been criticised for it, but that's quite often the case with anybody who does
steps outside of the mould,
comes
really.
out of the sort of box a bit. And I think that basically George Gershwin said that true music repeats and reflects society, and so I'm hoping that that is the case now with big bands, and it is coming back to that, as opposed to, I think we went through a phase where they were really unheard of, but now you are getting them in adverts. They're in adverts all the time. But I'm not sure today's generation necessarily know that is a big band unless you go and see that sort of music live. Once you've seen it live, I think you're usually hooked.
And that's a whole different experience, isn't it? To hear a big band on a recording, but actually to see 17 musicians on stage doing what they do best, which is recreating a fantastic sound, and seeing such talented players.
It's called call and response, so it takes a team of 17 to be able to do it, to be able to read like that and to be able to feel that music. And I think sort of swing music is the crossover, the improvised and the orchestrated, and I think when that works like that, and the time to go and see that is live. I don't think you can get that across on any recording, no matter what.
It's sort of because it's a 17-piece big band. Is that? I mean, I know in modern terms that is a big band, but just sort of casting it back again to your father's day, was that a big band in those days?
That was a big band. You can have 15-piece, 17-piece, or you can go up then and add string sections. Or you could go completely mental like Bert Kempfert, and it just becomes absolutely enormous, which is what, if I had the money, that is definitely what I'd do. I'd have vibraphones, I'd have 2 cellos, I'd have the whole works, but still do the big band stuff, but add some quirky touches in there. And Stan Kenton, again, another one who went beyond that 17-piece and sort of just grew and grew and grew. This day and age, I'm not sure we have any venues would even fit in this country.
So kind of what defines a big band as opposed to an orchestra or an ensemble?
And the brass stands really in the call and response, and usually big band is associated with dance music. In other words, waltzes, cha-chas, foxtrots, Lindy Hop, jitterbug, dance bands, which is where they came from. Well, they came from the African-American influence, obviously, and which I do like the sort of jungle music, actually, like sort of Duke Ellington. So I'll just add that in there. It's debbiecotis.co.uk, by the way.
So when, with sort of the formation of big bands, what was it that really brought big bands together in the first place? What really was the driving factor?
Social climate of the time. Basically, the sound that we now associate with big bands is obviously the African American influence when they came into port, and the slavery really is where it all took off from. And then you had compared with British music, so that was very 1, 2, 3, 4, very upright, very noted, very came from the church. You had music that came from the slaves, which was all chants and came from sort of drum chants to singing chants. Basically, the crossover of the two meant that you had people doing things like picking up trombones for, pence and using a plate in the end, and then you had your growling trombones and your screaming trumpets, which we had never experimented with before. So then you started to get that sound, and then that compared with the dance thing that came over, because you had very much a black and white culture. Then you had things like the cakewalk as a dance, which I don't know if you know the cakewalk. The cakewalk was a dance that was played by black bands in places like the Cotton Club in the late 30s. And basically it took the mickey out of the British aristocracy. So the walk was taking the mickey out of the British aristocracy, and the prize was a cake.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, there's a useful bit of information.
No, excellent. And so I know, kind of unfortunately, in my mind, lots of people associate big bands with the wartime era. And the reason I say unfortunately is because it actually existed way before and a long period of time after those war years.
It was a case of boosting morale, really. And also for dancing, when people came back from war, you were able to dance at dances with your partner. And then we had things like the stroll which was a bit of a line dance, which could be done by partners, single people whose partners were out fighting for the country. So it was a boosting morale and a general get-together, a bit like we all do down the pub now. It's a shame we can't fit the band in the local boozer.
But there was certainly throughout the sort of 20s and 30s, the big bands were really emerging.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some great bands. I mean, and also you had the battles of the bands then as well. So, and they were in every club and every place, and dance halls, big, like the Savoy Dance Hall, the Tracks, and over here you had Palais de Dance, Hammersmith Palais, which is sadly another venue that's been knocked down that we all tried to save.
Yeah.
The Astoria was another one, but it was all based on, then it grew into dance music. You had the Harry Roy and people like that, which was the dance bands, the British dance bands, which were known sort of more as the gramophone and broadcasting came in.
Yeah.
Very early days, the very early sort of wax cylinder recordings. Have you ever heard any of those? They're just brilliant. There's no drums on them at all. It's just think.
But we'll go to one of your tracks now, Debbie, which is called Hot Toddy.
Yeah, it's a great drink. I recommend it.
What ho?
Yes, well done. That was jolly good.
Yeah. Well done.
We do. And because you are listening to Harry and Edna on the wireless, recorded live. So if we make a mistake, it goes out.
Don't mention the Sony Radio Award.
No, I'm not. You told me never to mention that again.
I did, didn't I?
And so you did.
Well, it has to be done.
You'll have to. In fact, that leads lovingly to a nice tenuous link then. So you can actually hear all the previous radio shows. If you go to harryandedna.co.uk, click on the tab that says wireless, you can not only see the times we're broadcasting, but also all the previous radio shows. And if you want to know what we're talking about, the Sony radio show, that was round about 2013, if I remember, round about May time.
Yeah.
We crashed and burned at it, didn't we?
Yeah. Hey, we couldn't.
We lost out to national radio.
Yeah.
No, the national radio station in the UK, in Britain, took the prize.
Yeah. But it's okay. We were in the running, which was very proud.
It's just not on, really.
No, see?
Yeah. So if you want to give us the applause, like you hear from whenever Debbie Curtis plays, you can get hold of us, of course, on the old Twitter, which is the best way. Twitter Telegraph, and it's @Harry and Edna.
What ho?
So, Debbie, growing up with big band music all around you, was it something that, did you ever sort of kick back against it, or were you just always there with it right from the start?
No, I stayed absolutely loving it. The only thing was my dad used to get really stressed out with the sheet music, and sort of numerous rows at home with sheet music spread all over the floor, and, don't go near the music and things like that. So that was a bit off-putting. And obviously, as a child, I grew up learning the piano and various things. And my dad was constantly sort of leaning over me, and I was doing things like playing Take 5 when I was about sort of 7.
Yeah.
And I remember one time really going over it loads and thinking, when he comes in, he's going to be really pleased that I've got this perfect. And he went, well, you could have done that note there a bit different. And it was, no. So there was always that sort of pressure with it. But no, absolutely loved the music. Always will. There's something about it that I just do absolutely love more than any other kind of music. I can appreciate lots of other music, but big band is really where my heart is, really.
Did you, with growing up with it, did you go to the concerts? Were you always there listening to the actual live music?
Yeah, I rang the alarm clock on Pennsylvania 65000 and dropped it when I was about 6. And I remember handing some flowers to people like Michael Dennison and Dulcie Gray when I was really small, and meeting people like Tommy Cooper. So I was always seemed to be at the gigs. New Year's Eve, when I got older, I went to those gigs, but when I was smaller, I remember listening at home to them when he was playing live on the radio. And I remember sort of my cousin was obviously babysitting for me one New Year's Eve, and my parents sort of said jokingly, now, roll up the carpets, have a good time. And we actually did roll up the carpets, so when they come back, it's sad really, isn't it?
But did you kind of feel a sense of pride when you were listening to the radio, knowing that was your dad leading that band that you could hear coming through the radio?
I don't know really. I think I just waited for him to play certain songs that I really liked, which then were things like Tuxedo Junction, I used to obviously wait for the Gay Gordons and things like that, and the Okie Kokie if it was a party. I was a bit sad like that. But no, I think I just used to wait for the songs that I used to like, wait for those to come up, that I could dance to, really. I didn't really sort of associate him as in being quite well known or anything at all. I had no idea, really.
So kind of growing up with all those people like that you say that you met, like Tommy Cooper, was that just something you accepted as being normal everyday life?
I don't think I even associated them with being famous at all. I just used to associate them with coming round and doing either tricks at the table, like taking a coin out of your ear and things like that. I didn't really associate them until years and years later, realising that they were actually really well known.
And so did they come round, as you say, they came round your house? Was that just part and parcel of everyday life?
Yeah, I think they used to start off discussing music and shows, and then I think it used to probably end up in some kind of drunken stupor. The usual sort of musician lifestyle. Yeah. That's one thing that actually hasn't changed.
No. Did your mum sort of ever turn around and go, for goodness sake, don't you get into music? Or was it something you were always encouraged to do?
My dad really wanted me to get into music all the time, no matter what. My mum, funny enough, I also studied fine art, and my mum sort of, I think, wanted me to go down more the sort of teaching route or a professor of sensible sort of job where you've got regular money.
Yeah,
so
9 to 5.
I didn't do that, no, and I'm still broke.
Yeah. Did you then one day kind of just say to yourself, right, I'm going to take over my father's band, or was that something you aspired to do, or did it just sort of fall into place?
What actually happened was my dad died, and so I did take it over, but he had always said to me as I'd grown up, it's yours when something happens to me. And I should think, geez, thanks.
I want with 17 guys and instruments.
But it was really strange, because up until then, I'd been in front of the band and things like that, and been on both sides of it, backstage, front stage, etc. But I'd never actually stood up there and it was me
leading them,
doing it. Yeah. So I pulled it off the road. I saw the set of gigs he had out and then pulled it off the road and revamped it slightly to make it mine, so that although I played all the arrangements and everything, it had a good feeling about it, not a bad feeling. But I still don't actually really play Moonlight Serenade, because that one is one of the ones that I do associate with my dad, and for some reason I find that one upsetting. But Little Darling and Autumn Leaves I play on nearly every gig.
Did you feel that you, I'm assuming it was very useful to have that musical background and that upbringing to then be able to lead a band? Do you have to have been in a band, playing in a band, to then be able to lead them?
I think, sort of having grown up with it, I had an interest in it, but also I understood the sort of call and response and how the band worked. I understood that it wasn't just about the notes that you're doing, but the quality of the arrangement you're doing, the feel of the song, the emotion you put into it. I had a grip on what it was about. And they say that a band is only as good as its band leader, which I remember on the very first gig I sort of did after it became sort of more mine, and I'd sort of revamped it slightly. I remember thinking, geez, they all sound really jittery, these songs. I don't think anyone noticed. By the sort of end of the gig, I was well in the swing of it then, but the first half was definitely a bit, bumbly, and I was glad it was a sit-down show, not a dance, because it wouldn't have been very good.
Is it a sort of enormous pressure on you then for the whole feel of the concert, because it's you leading that band? So do you sort of take on that onus that, if it sounds a bit shaky, that's down to me, or is it a kind of a collective?
Yeah, I think I take
effort?
it on board. If something's wrong, then it's down to something I've done, but usually I think a lot of it's about confidence. So if the band is confident in me and I'm confident in the band, it works as it's a whole team thing.
Yeah.
And usually that works. You get the odd number that you think feels colder or doesn't quite seem to be as good as another. But I don't think I've ever played a song through that's perfect anyway. So I'm still striving for that.
How do you change that mid-song? If you feel that it's not quite working, how do you then change the mood of a song?
I sort of do this chirionomy thing, which chirionomy is early conducting gestures, which is basically waving my arms around and running around everywhere. But I try to sort of push the band into a different feel, really,
right.
Depending the section that I think is going to be able to move it the quickest. It's usually the drummer, which is why I always try and make sure I've got eye contact all the time.
So you have little signals that you do out of the normal... people normally assume a
we
conductor
can't talk about those on air.
It's sort of waving arms, and we all kind of think that's just doing the tempo of a band.
Well, it's the downbeat usually, and it's, they're keeping the tempo. I tend to, I suppose, be more critical as far as trombones than any other instrument, probably because my dad was a trombonist. And he had people like Don Lusher in his trombone section. So I'm always sort of on the lookout on the trombone section for any mistakes. But I also leave notes on people's music pads, and things like that. Little tiny notes.
Don't mess it up tonight.
Yeah, it's like not again.
Because I was told this very funny story, and we'll come to kind of your contribution to it. And I didn't realise it happened. And it was an anecdote somebody said about Benny Goodman, was that you could go to a concert of Benny Goodman's, and as he was leading the band, if he thought it wasn't sounding right, he would actually stop the whole band in the middle of the concert, rehearse them till he felt they were getting it right, and then he would sort of start the concert off again. Yeah. And I just thought, wow, that's mad. In the middle of... You're sat there as an audience member and then they start rehearsing.
My dad was very like that with things. I remember he stopped Peanut Vendor on a show once, and they would have da-da-da-da-da-da, and he was like, stop there. Whereas I tend to more... I do it in the sound check. I'll go over and over and over a number in the sound check to try and get it right. But I also write on their pads things like, hell is full of musical amateurs.
But you were saying earlier, your dad would also do that, would also stop a concert and redirect it, or would he single people out? Is that something that leaders
used to
did?
Be sort of more ruthless, possibly in front of people than I am. Though on the sound check I sort of do come into my own a little. But he would, I remember once he did a gig and somebody actually had died in the sax section, and he said, well, let's face it, lads, nobody's indispensable, off we go again. And I thought, I just couldn't, that's not sort of my style at all.
Yeah.
Although I tend to have my wobblers in the sound check ready.
Yeah.
And I hate sound checks, I absolutely hate them. And I always think, naff sound check, good gig, so I make sure they're naff.
Yeah, get it all out and over with now.
What ho?
Yet more rapturous applause.
This is www.debbiecurtis.co.uk.
Perfect. When we were talking off air, I was quite surprised. I just assumed big bands got together and rehearsed kind of all the time just to keep yourselves together and knowing where the tracks. But you were saying they often don't. No,
I've had in my entire life 2 rehearsals. And that was when I did revamp the band, and I did one rehearsal to test out which arrangements I was going to start off with, and a second rehearsal so I could film it and see what we look like and hear it.
Does it not make you nervous then? Is there an assumption that these guys are of such a level that you can literally just come together?
Yeah.
Play?
I mean, they are absolutely amazing players. I mean, sort of people like Martin Shaw and Mark White, who are in the trumpet section, are absolutely superb. The whole band is superb. And I do put in sort of Goodwin arrangements, and I know they look at me horrified, particularly if we haven't tested it at all in the soundtrack or anything, and Goodwin's quite busy, Gordon Goodwin stuff. And
they just play it cold, literally,
yes,
over the music and away you go.
Yeah, the poor bass player, if you play the jazz piece, and he's on the double bass, not an electric.
Yeah.
And one of them rang me up after a gig, and he said, I had a really nice gig, Debs, thanks. I can't speak, but...
Yeah. Do you then... when you are playing music kind of cold like that, if you've not rehearsed it together, even in sound check, is that where you, as the band leader, keep it together and realise that do you get sections that fall behind that you have to bring back in? Or?
Hopefully not. I tend to work mainly with 2 drummers, really, which is sort of Bob and Harold, and they're both absolutely fantastic. So they're really solid drummers. No, occasionally, they will go by the count that I count in. So if I count something in too slow, then unless I sort of shout across or start waving my arms around, then it will stay at that tempo unless I say otherwise. But it's usually only one or two that the tempos sort of slip. And if it's a song we know really well, you sort of naturally pick it up. But ideally, if you got it right, they should all be exactly right, you know.
And is that where sort of working together as long as you have?
Definitely, because you know everybody's sound and everybody's way they play, and they know the way the rest of the team works, and they know me, so they know even if I'm not facing them and I'm counting in, which is like the downbeat, they can just glance at, because you've got that confidence there.
Yeah.
And I think to grow as a big band, especially this day and age, if you want to try and do what some of the bands, you know, in the 40s achieved musically, then you need to have the same set of people to be able to grow with and to write new music for, you know, as well as playing the old arrangements.
Do you sort of like to vary what you play as well? Because I'm assuming when you're together as a band, even though you do lots of gigs together, you don't necessarily play the same tracks.
No,
all
never
the time.
play the same programme twice. I usually try to get Autumn Leaves and Little Darling somewhere in the set of every gig I do, because they're sort of personal favourites, and really they're sort of part of my parents' thing as well. And I usually start the show with St Louis Blues March. But every gig I do, I change the programme. I don't like to stick. I like to have a Miller number in there, a Hefty, a Kempfert, a Kenton. I like to have a whole lot of Basie. You know, so there's a real variety in there. So that way, whatever age of your audience, you've got something for everyone. You know, you can put in things like the Soul Bossa Nova, which is the, you know, Austin Powers theme, you know, and then you know, bossa nova meaning Brazilian jazz. So you've got your band bit in there, you know, and you've got your progressive jazz with Stan Kenton, and then you can put something like that in that appeals to younger people as well. And also I think it's quite good to put a couple or one or two of my own arrangements in as well of things that are older tracks that people do know. But you can see that I can actually write music, and it's, you know, a band is just as good these days as it was in the 40s, providing you've got that professionalism of musicians and people understand and, you know, have studied it and grown with it all your life. It's an amazing thing to do. You know, I love it as a job, absolutely love it. You know, I just wish there was more venues that took big bands on board and booked them more often, you know, rather than karaoke acts, really.
Yeah. And is there a reluctance, do you think, to book big bands? Is it purely financial, do you think, or is there just not the... Because it's kind of hard to disbelieve there's not the audience for it, because as we were saying, vintage is seeing a huge revival, music seeing a huge revival.
Robbie Williams is touring now, you know, swings both ways, and before that he had the Swing When You're Willing, and there's certainly the audience is out there.
Yeah.
But you've got the name Robbie Williams to get those people in.
Right.
The word big band in this day and age with the younger people can sometimes have negative connotations because they assume it's just Glenn Miller.
Yeah.
Rather than once you've seen a show, you know it's not, and you know it's a whole feel and it's great. But it takes people like Robbie Williams and, you know, Michael Bublé, and I know Peter Andre's got an album coming out. It takes those kind of people to do that kind of thing, to get it into the forefront again. But I think some of it is also financial as well. It's a lot of people to pay to put out, and the venues we have nowadays are so much smaller. We're getting pubs shutting down as well as the bigger venues that have already been shut.
What ho!
Now, Debbie, you just told us a wonderful nugget that you think your dad might have been playing in this orchestra.
Yeah, he was in that, a trombonist, Eddie Curtis. Yeah, he played with quite a lot of bands, actually. He's a lovely trombonist, actually. He won Melody Maker of the Year as well. For a young trombonist and stuff, yeah.
Was there a pressure on you to play musical instruments? I know you were talking about playing the piano, but did you then kind of go, well, I'm going to pick up this instrument?
There wasn't so much a pressure. I wanted to play the flute, and my dad brought me a clarinet.
Was that a subtle hint?
Yeah. And I remember at Christmas thinking, I bet I've got this flute. I bet I've got this. I opened it, it's like this clarinet. I was like, oh, God, it's still, you know. Yeah. And there was that. And then a couple of other times when I've taken up instruments, he's brought a different one in.
I'm not guiding you, however, but I think you should play.
Yes, it was like that. And no matter how much I said I wanted to play the flute, you know, it's like, no, you are going to go on the clarinet. I think that was because he had this thing about reed sections and like the not just doing the Miller sound, which is the melody, and the sax section playing the octave below, which is how he got his sort of sound. And he took out the guitarist, which was another have it. I kept saying to my dad that I'd play the guitar in the band as well.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh no, we don't need a guitarist. So it's totally the opposite.
So you never learned to play the guitar?
I did learn to play the guitar, yeah. Yeah, and I do play it in the band sometimes, but not as the chunky chunk sort of guitar. I do play a Gibson, but I try and vary it again. Like we have the lead guitar solo on and off of Hawaii 5-0. It varies. Sometimes I put it on guitar, sometimes I will put it on flute, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I will play the flute. When you get to your concerts, do you sometimes take a look at the audience and are surprised by the age range that come to them?
Yes, the Palladium, our youngest was 4 or 7, I think, and our oldest was 94. So that was quite a big, and it's trying to, yes, and that's the whole thing I want to try and do, is get that to young and old alike. So there's something for everyone, because if you don't get it to new audiences, it will without a doubt die out, because, you know, that's the way it is. And I think one of the ways is obviously through dance. Another of the ways is through www.debbiecurtis.co.uk, Twitter, Facebook, you know, YouTube, all of which our videos are on, by the way, folks.
Is it really important, do you think, to open up big bands to young audiences? Because as you were saying, actually a lot of youngsters don't realise how much big band music is out there and is being listened to on adverts.
Exactly. On the adverts alone, you know, 9 out of 10 times, you know, it is a big band on the adverts, you know, on jingles, anything. But it's that identifying it with that's the sound, and this is what it looks like when you hear it, what it sounds like when you go and see it live. There's that sort of, I think Robbie Williams, again, is doing a lot for that, because he's getting it to a new audience.
Yeah.
You know, some of the tracks of his I like, some I don't. But the main thing is the association with a big band. You know, he's taking it on things, you know, shows on television, which, you know, a few years ago we weren't even getting a big band on a show, you know. And I mean, to be honest, it was diabolical a few years ago. You'd get a sax solo and they'd be showing a trumpet player anyway. So, I mean, you know, we've moved on a little bit more than that. But it needs to go to new audiences to keep it alive and to be learning more and writing more arrangements for it, because without that you won't get the people interested in playing those instruments to be able to carry on writing it as a trade. I mean, music writing is not as you've got music packages now on a computer. You can play a chord and it'll write it for you. But I do sort of with the proper pen and ink platinum koi music nib pen, you know, which is the old, what you call engraving, the proper pen and ink. Yeah. And all of the band love it when we do use those arrangements, because with me it's the fear of it. Oh no, I've written it all, it's going to run. It's going to rain. No, but on the whole, it's got a different feel when it's all hand done. It has got that quality, classy craftsmanship to it, which is another reason why with young people it's another branch that you know, we're losing if you don't get it to new audiences, being able to do it and write it and recognise it.
And as we were saying earlier, seeing a big band live, you just cannot beat live music, can you?
No, and it's a huge, huge sound. I mean, people think, you know, you go to a club and you think the bass is loud there. You want to go and hear a big band because the bass is coming straight off of it and it's really loud. And you've got a tuba if you've got a very good big band, like myself, of course. I've got a tuba and a string bass, because the string bass replaced the tuba in 1929, by the way. But I do double up, so it's got a very, very thick sound. Yeah. And it's not until you see that live that people really appreciate that, you know. It's down to more venues also need to stop shutting down. I know it's a money thing, but try and squash these bands in more, you know. Yeah. Because once people have seen it, they usually come back.
Also, certainly the venue I'm at, a lot of our big bands have said we don't need amplifying, because actually we have
you can play it completely raw.
The theatre are brilliant, and actually we make enough sound that you don't need to amplify us. So actually, isn't that a trademark of a fantastic sound?
Yes, yeah, you can play it completely raw anywhere, and it sounds as good, if not better, as when it is amplified as well. So you can fit the venue. I mean, and they are. I mean, years ago you used to have them in hangars, you know, playing in hangars, and the whole sound would carry right round. You know, nowadays it's well, I mean, put it this way: we could carry on with a big band if the electric went. Yeah. You know, so it's very cost worthy and cost effective. You know.
Is there a thrill? Do you get a huge thrill standing in front of the big band and realising that you're a part of that massive sound?
I think at nearly every gig I do, I always say, I think I'm really lucky to be able to be doing that at all. And it's the best job out there. Could just do with every day of the week work with it, really. Yeah. But it is an absolutely brilliant job. And I think the way forward is the live gigs. So though obviously I do sell CDs and downloads. And by the way, we're available on Amazon, iTunes, CD Baby. And there's also our discs on the website, www.debbiecurtis.co.uk.
Brilliant. And you've got a new album starting that's due out. So you're still doing lots of studio work, still producing. Yes,
I'm finishing one album at the moment with Sophie Shaw. And I think the first track to come off of that will probably be Zoot Suit Riot. Hence, I wore the suit today.
Yeah,
for those of you who can't see me, it's a stripy suit.
Well,
it's that time, I'm afraid, for us to go. But I'm trying to type into the keyboard. What's this website again?
It's www.debbiecurtis.co.uk.
And we can't promote enough getting out there, going out, listening to big band sounds. Go and check out venues. Check out Debbie's website and go out there and listen to live music, because you absolutely cannot beat it.
I'd like to thank Harry and Edna for coming on my big band show today.
Yes. You're welcome.
But it's that time. I have to say toodle pip.
And it's a tinkety
So
tonk from
long,
me.
farewell.
What ho!